Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, we've got a really interesting show today because we're going to be talking about anticipated loss.
Yes, Mom. We're going to be talking about finding hope after an anticipated loss, and we have 3 great guests that'll be here that have been through anticipated loss. And I will introduce them in a minute, but first I want to talk a little bit about the fact that you have a new book.
Oh, great. I'm glad you brought it up. Open to Love, The Secrets of Senior Dating. And I wrote it with my fiance, Dr. Frank Powers. And I know there are a lot of people there who've had a loss. And, you know, my husband passed away, Heidi's dad. And I met a psychologist online, and we wrote this book together because we know that there's somebody out there for you. Again, Open to Love, The Secrets of Senior Dating. You can go to the Dating Doctor's website and see it, or Open to Hope. And we're very proud to say, Heidi, that all the proceeds go to the Open to Hope Foundation.
Wonderful. So we're looking forward to the publication release date, the pub date, February 14th, Valentine's Day. Thank you. So, Mom, let me introduce our guests, and then we'll get right into how they found hope after the anticipated losses that they went through. So I guess I'll start with Jennifer. She's here. We've got Jennifer O'Brien, Ken Ross, and Elisabeth Copland today. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Okay, so Jennifer is no stranger to grief and loss. She's been on our podcast before. She lost her brother, husband, and both parents. For over 35 years, Jennifer has been a practice management consultant to physicians. She kept an art journal as a form of self-care during her late husband's 22-month illness. It was published as The Hospice Doctor's Widow, a Journal. And this book has won numerous awards. So welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much.
Next to Jennifer is Ken Ross. And Ken is on our board of directors at the Open to Hope Foundation.
Yes, indeed.
So we know him well. Ken is the son of Dr. Elisabeth Kubler-Ross and serves as the founder and president of the Elisabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation. Throughout the final 9 years of his mother's life, Ken assumed the role of her principal care provider. He has kept his mother's legacy alive by donating her archives to Stanford University and collaborating with publishers to disseminate Kubler-Ross books in 44 languages, which is pretty amazing. Ken is a distinguished travel photographer capturing moments across 109 countries. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you. Glad I'm coming through New York today.
Exactly. Thank you for stopping by New York. And next to Ken is Elisabeth Copland, and we just saw her play on Tuesday night. Afterwards, Ken was on a panel talking about the play and about his own experiences, and I have to say, Elisabeth, you know I've told you this, the play was phenomenal.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so realistic. It was so realistic that I'm like, wait a minute. So many of the topics and the themes were very relevant to my personal life. So you really captured what goes on in the grief process.
Well, thank you.
So Elisabeth turned her personal loss into the groundbreaking play cycle Grief Dialogues. Her play Till Death, which is the one we saw, Mom, opened off Broadway in November of 2023 here in New York City. In addition, Elisabeth wrote the award-winning play Hospice, A Love Story, and her play honoring choices became a festival favorite short film. She also co-wrote the play The Choice with her husband, Scott. So welcome, Elisabeth.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We've got a bunch of rock stars here.
I know, Mom. I'm telling you.
Whoa.
Where do we start?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know we were talking about it before the show, how anticipated loss can be different than sudden loss, and it kind of rocks your world. You know, who am I now, you know, without this job we had together with taking caregiving. So maybe you want to start and tell us about your experience.
Yeah, I've been a caregiver to my mother, my husband, and long-distance caregiver to my father. And yeah, it's a huge transition, caregiver to griever. One of the hardest ones, for sure.
And it was interesting for you because wasn't your husband a hospice doctor?
Yes, he was a hospice and palliative care physician.
Do they make good patients?
In a word, no. Yeah, so when he got sick, we had to sort of turn his wisdom and experience on ourselves. And very, very challenging. And he wanted his privacy. He didn't want to be treated by his partners and the fellows, the trainees. So the palliative care that we had was do it yourself. And so it brought us very, very close, which I think happens in the caregiving situation, which just makes the loss that much deeper, because you really are lost. You don't know what to do. Your whole reason for being has been to care for this person, and then they die, and it's very, very difficult transition. You're sort of reaching everywhere. Sometimes there's relief. There's an element of that.
I think that's part of when you've had a loss, is there is a relief, and it's hard to grapple with the fact that, hey, I don't have to take care of anybody tonight.
Yeah.
I can go do whatever I want.
Get your first full night's sleep in a long, long time.
Yeah.
And I would also think it's difficult to admit that, because people might judge you. Like saying,
People
wait
judge
a
you.
minute,
Why
is there relief?
Yeah, let's get into that judgment in a minute. So let's hear about your story, Ken, and then I want to make sure we get back to judgment, because I think that is huge.
Well, I'd like to talk about my father for a change.
Okay.
All right.
Back when I was 12 in 1972, my father was having very, just terrible health. He was having a lot of heart attacks.
Wow.
And my mother was certain he was going to die. So she contacted a psychic. And the psychic said, somebody in your house, this was in October, somebody in your house in April is going to die in your immediate family.
Wow.
So my mother began preparing us, over and over
This is 4
every
months?
week. Pardon?
From October
Through April of the following April.
Oh, wow.
So, my mother was certain it was my father. It was just the 4 of us in the house. And then, I think around Christmas, unexpectedly, my grandmother was sent over from California to live with us. And she ended up dying in April.
Oh, my.
So there was this period of like 7 months, and there was no plan of the grandmother coming. So that was just kind of mind-blowing. And my mother was already doing this work with death and dying, so she thought, I'm going to prepare the children. But so we ended up having this loss. But then I spent the next 20 years expecting my father to die any day. I mean, he came home late. My sister and I are like waiting for the telephone to ring, and we had nannies. He was never there because he was a really hard-working doctor. And then I was traveling around the world, and I was always saying, oh, your dad's back in the hospital, and he had hernia, and he had this. And so I had 20 years of this kind of anticipatory grief.
Wow.
So when he died, again, I thought it was kind of a relief, because he was not happy. He was not enjoying life at the end. And so I was relieved on his behalf. But it was a tough 20 years. Even though we were prepared, we were almost kind of over-prepared.
Yeah.
Because my mother talked about it ad nauseum. So
That's a long time to prepare, 20 years.
So it was kind of surreal when he actually died.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
let's get back to that, because I want to find out from all of you, after we hear from you, what you did, what you did physically, emotionally, mentally after you didn't have to take care.
Right. Right. So the question is my anticipatory grief, right? Okay. So I have a lot to choose from, unfortunately, but I will focus on my mother's death. My mother died from complications due to Parkinson's. My father had died. From diagnosis to death for my father was 4 months, but he was the healthy one. My mother had had Parkinson's for quite a long time. We all thought that she would go first, and that actually, my parents lived in Texas, that my dad would move out to the Seattle area where I was living with my sons, the only grandchildren. Dad would come live with us and live out the rest of his life, which could, be another 20 years. So, and my dad retired in December of that year, and by September, he was having trouble swallowing. He went to the doctor and found out he had esophageal cancer, and from diagnosis to death, it was 4 months. And that was a whole anticipatory thing where he was in Texas, I was outside of Seattle, my sister was in Miami, and we were tag teaming to help take care of his care. Actually, when it was my turn, after my dad had a stroke due to the chemo and he was back in the hospital, I was in the hospital with him, and I get a call that my husband has just had to go to the emergency room. He has a rare blood infection, and he may not make it through the night, and that's in Seattle, Washington, and oh, by the way, a blizzard's coming. So that's another whole story. That's actually a country and western song that I won't get into. But what I talk about then is then my mother was going to move in with my sister who lived in Florida. My sister didn't have children. It was easier for her to take care. And after all, doesn't everybody retire to Florida? But no, that didn't work out. So I moved Mom to Bainbridge Island, Washington, with her grandsons, which she absolutely loved. And for about 2 years, it was just wonderful to have her there. She was, for the most part, incapacitated with Parkinson's, but she could participate in family things. And you know, I would get a wheelchair, her wheelchair, and take her to school activities. And we had a wheelchair ramp put up for the house and so forth. But then it really began to decline, and I had her in an adult family home just 10 minutes from my house, which was absolutely ideal. There were 4 residents, live-in caregivers, as well as round-the-clock caregivers, and that was just ideal. But then she started to decline even further, and frankly, she should have been moved to a skilled nursing facility. But by then, she had already had all the caregivers fall in love with her, and nobody wanted to let her go to that type of care, not that there's anything wrong with it. And so they told me, we want to keep her as long as she still recognizes us. So we did that, and but I kept waiting, like you, I kept waiting for the phone call, and finally we planned actually a vacation between Christmas and New Year's. Both our sons had birthdays in there as well. So we planned a skiing trip. And that was like the first time since my mother's health really began to decline that I was more than a 10-minute drive away. So we had this lovely Sun Mountain Lodge in Eastern Washington, but every time I went back into the hotel room, I was waiting for that little red light that said, that call home, your mom's gone. But each time it was our friend Jim saying, meet us at the, blah, 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 we got burgers for the kids or whatever. So I get back home, I think it was January 2nd, we get back home, and I go back to the home, and they say, this is really it. And I said, well, I'm going to bring in hospice. And they said, that would be a good idea. Well, the hospice people come, and they go, but she's been so well cared for, so you don't need our hospice services in that regard, but we can help the caregivers, because they're the ones, quite frankly, who are really starting the anticipatory grief of losing my mom. So we brought in hospice for that, and the short answer to the rest of it was that we brought everybody in to say goodbye. My sister flew in from Florida. My mom didn't die for 10 days. She waited for everybody to leave, just like they say in the storybooks. Yeah. We all left. We all went back to our days and our nights. And 5 a.m. that morning of January 12th, I got a phone call that she was gone.
So I wondered, what did people do? Did it change your life? And Jennifer, what did you do?
Yeah, it changed my life, absolutely. Each time, to a certain degree, it changed my life. Perhaps the most significant was with my husband, because I had kept the art journal while he was sick and after he died, and I work in the healthcare field, showed it to a physician, and he said, this journal would help others. You need to try to get it published. So, yeah, so I actually went to work in a different way in my husband's space, the hospice, grief, end-of-life space. And that's been a really rich, I think is the best word, because at times it feels like he's with me 100%, and at other times it reminds me that he's not with me, and that's
so you
really
found
hard.
Working and going into that space.
Working, yes, for me, keeping busy, having a plan, whether it's how am I going to get through. I happen to think that one day at a time feels insurmountable in the throes of acute grief. So I like to look at it either, let's just get through the next 10 minutes, or the other way I like to look at it is at the end of the day, congratulating myself that I got through a day. Yeah, that really helped me a lot.
I know that you kept the journal while he was dying, and your book has gotten so many amazing accolades, and my mother loved it, and I know Stanford University, there was someone there that I mean, people have just said it is a phenomenal book. And I love how you kept the journal and then published it. After he died, did you continue with the journal,
Yes.
and did that help you as well?
Yeah, probably about
Okay.
a third of the book is after he died. Yeah,
So you got
yeah,
that
for sure.
journaling.
No, the art, and it's all an art journal. See, for me, the art is a big. If I can figure out something creative to do to start processing, you know, pick up a thought, a feeling, and then just really work it artistically. I've been able to work through a lot of stuff that way. You know, all the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Love it.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Artistic work is creative work is really important. I feel in grief.
I've got to ask you, how was it to be home alone when he wasn't there, when he left?
When he after he died. Yeah, I mean, to some degree, it's still hard, right? I actually find myself having to have a radio on just because the quiet is too quiet now.
Yeah.
So I typically turn on some classical music or something just to keep, something in the background.
Did you do any support group or anything?
I didn't do support group. I have a therapist who is very experienced in grief and loss, and she has been a real godsend, yes, and did a lot of reading. Yeah.
And Ken, how about you? How did you, what have you done? Your dad died and your mom died, and well, when your mother died, that was the end of both of your parents. So you were really freed up to do.
I was freed up, and yet I began the foundation, so I feel like I'm almost more familiar with my mother now than I've ever been. So she's constantly surrounding me. I'm constantly getting new tapes, her lectures and interviews and things I've never seen.
And Ken,
So
didn't you
it's
move?
like, yeah, I moved to Arizona to take care of my dad, and he died within 3 weeks.
And when your mother died, you moved out of the country, didn't you?
First, I took care of all her affairs, and then a few months later I decided I needed to just take a break. So I ended up moving to Sweden with an open-ended lease and just having no plan. I love doing things like doing a one-way ticket and having no plans. I like just the randomness of it, and I call it the throwing the dice theory. Just throw the dice and see
unlike
where
what
life
Mom
leads
said,
us. Yeah.
And you could be random because you had been caretaking and you had a lot going on, and then after she died, there was space to be able
And
to...
for Dad, both.
Yeah, when
And the dad, yeah.
when they burnt down her house, she had a staff of 13 or 16 people, and then it was me taking care of her.
Wow.
So it was overwhelming, and I
Wow.
had a heart attack on an airplane. And
You had a heart attack?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was super crazy.
Because it took its toll on your health.
It did.
Which
yeah.
we talk about that a lot.
Yeah,
You
it
can,
does.
Yeah, it was
you know,
crushing.
Your health can take a
Yeah.
toll.
Well,
so taking care of her was more crushing than her departure,
you know,
actually.
Yeah.
So-
let's talk about your photography for a minute, because you're an award-winning photographer. I mean, you've done stuff for National Geographic. I mean, you're a person in and of yourself, and I know you play that down.
Well,
But
that was
that's
Mom's
the
gift to me,
reality.
was to go out and, take chances and live life fully, and
Yeah.
always, think that, your death is going to come too soon. So what are we going to do today to make life interesting?
I just wondered if it changed your photography at all, or any of your eye behind the lens,
It
what you
changed my
picked up. or-
photography, but it kind of reinforced the idea of like reaching further, going on crazier trips, doing more, hanging out on more helicopters, just totally
Taking more
pushing
risks.
the boundaries of
Wow.
everything.
You know, I think that's interesting, because you were closed in with all this caregiving,
Right, yeah.
and suddenly you could
Liberated.
open up.
Yeah, so, I kind of celebrated by celebrating life, and, I don't think they'd find that disrespectful. I think they
Do you know
would have
what?
been
Do you know
happy.
what though? I'm feeling a little bit of the guilt. You know, I shouldn't just say, "Hey, I have just gone out and done this," thing, and you did. You went out and went to helicopters.
Yeah, I
And,
felt guilty that I couldn't do more, I guess, while they were alive, because, my mother was very demanding, and she didn't think so, but she was a perfectionist. Yeah, she told me I was too Swiss. So, Kenneth, I don't care what they think, just do, tell Time Magazine that I don't like this. I'm like, no, Mom, we're going to,
Right.
be very politically. Kenneth.
right. But I love how you've expanded, and gone to all these countries, and you're doing the hospice thing, and it's keeping her memory alive too. But you're Ken. You're a great guy.
Thank you. I found a way to combine my photography and travel and continue my mom's legacy by starting these groups in other countries. So, and even when I go on a vacation, I will seek out, a cancer hospital or a hospice. I went to El Salvador. I met with the country's only hospice, and nice chat with them. Same in Iraq. Same wherever I go. I'm always.
Yeah. So you're taking her legacy, but you're being Ken.
Yeah, it's
I love it.
a nice symbiotic relationship between the art and Mom and what my dad taught me.
And your dad, yeah. And Elisabeth.
Well, when my mom died, I had young children, and the first thing I did was get the car washed. Because life has to go on. The car, it was January in the Seattle area, so there was, you have to wash off the old mud to make room for the new mud. So I did that. I will say, and life had to go on because of my kids and my husband, and I was also doing consulting work at the time. I'm just going to touch on this slightly as you were talking about getting sick. Shortly after my mom died, I had a very serious car accident. I was all alone, thank goodness. I didn't hit anybody else, and that woke me up to the fact that I was not taking care of me. I had been taking care of someone for so long, and my family, that I didn't, even when that one person was no longer part of the equation, I was now giving everything I had to the family, right? Which was fine, except I was forgetting me, and I flipped the car in the snow. It was very serious. Additionally, I found out after that car accident that I have lupus. And I still work with lupus. I don't say struggle. I work with lupus. I have an excellent doctor, and there's ways I can manage it, but I have that. Would I have suffered, apparently lupus is in your system, but, it was triggered from the stress of taking care of my dad and then my mom.
I got alopecia. I lost all the back of my hair 2 years before my husband died because he had staph infection then.
Right.
And, and you can't deny that. All of a sudden you're brushing your hair and your hair falls out, and it's like, I guess I'm stressed.
Yes, exactly. And then later, when my cousin, who had ovarian cancer, was dying, and my sister and I were with her the final week of her life, caregiving around the clock. Her new husband was quite distraught with the loss of the impending loss of his wife. I've always been a writer. I've always loved writing essays and so forth. I've always loved the theater. I was going to be an actress. Till one day I realized I could eat or pay rent. I could not do both as an actress, but I just always loved the theater. My husband and I enjoy it, and we're patrons. I was on the board of the Intiman Theater in Seattle and so forth. So when my cousin died, I started writing. And I took my writing and I started writing plays and dialogue. And that's how I processed. I turned to art. And in fact, my motto for my nonprofit, my nonprofit's Grief Dialogues, but my motto is, out of grief comes art. And that's how I get through it to this day.
And some of the art you might have is planting a garden.
Exactly.
Or, you guys are amazing and have done, the big things, but you can do small things, art. And
right, or cooking.
Cooking.
I work with a lot of widows, and they're cooks, and then they lose their person, and they're like, well, who am I going to cook for? So my suggestion always is, take it, cook and take it to a women's shelter, or so, just because you're alone doesn't mean you can't share your talents and your creativity if it's in the culinary form.
Right,
I like that, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Some people do say I can't cook for one, so I like that.
Right. So set up a cook for the.
I was just going to ask you each for a piece of advice, but we'll let that be yours. It's fabulous. Have you got a piece of advice for somebody who's had a loss and has spent their time taking care?
Well, via my mother, she was always very big on externalization. So you don't have to externalize everything at once. You can do it a piece at a time. But, she's all about building a community, compassionate communities, whether it's church, whether it's your friends, whether it's doing activities, it's art, cooking, anything. Build a community, be surrounded by people who love you, and learn to externalize in a healthy manner, in a balanced manner.
I like that. Elisabeth, do you have?
Mine is to do something with your hands, and you're so right with gardening. I also love to garden, but it can be doodling. It can be, actually I have a friend who has a color book. You don't have to be original. Just do something with your hands. To me, that's That's just always been, and I don't mean strangle somebody, although that might seem like it sometimes.
Right.
But whether it's writing or drawing or sending a thank you note or doodling or coloring, just do something with your hands. It really helps the brain and the heart.
That's interesting.
I like that.
I play the
yeah.
drums. That's one of my best.
There you go.
Drumming
good
is
one.
great therapy.
I
Yeah,
like
it's great.
that, Ken.
Music
You
is
can get out all
wonderful.
your aggressions.
Well, most of them anyway.
On my website, I have a free download called A Griever's Guide to the Major Days.
Nice.
And it's all about handling the holiday, a death anniversary, just on a very practical level. So
Okay, we got your
I
website,
love that.
Elisabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation. Is that where we find you?
EKR
Oh, where do we find you?
griefdialogues.com, and I actually have something to color on my website.
All right.
So, absolutely.
Well, thank you guys for being on the show. It's been great to have you on the
Thank
show today,
you.
and lots of good advice.
I love it.
It's a
Yes.
pleasure with you too.
Yeah. Delightful.
And again, we want to remind you about our new book, Open to Love, The Secrets of Senior Dating. You can find it at The Dating Doctor or at the Open to Hope Foundation. And all of the proceeds go to the Open to Hope Foundation to help people find hope after loss.
Great. Look forward to reading it, Mom.
Yep, release date on Valentine's Day. We want to thank you all for joining us on this show today. And Heidi and I always want to remind you that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.
You don't need enough hope to get through the day. You don't need enough hope to get through a year. You just need enough hope to get through the next moment.
Even though we had this thing happen to us, it also happened for us.
We hold the memories of those that we cared for, that were a part in the making of our characters. And when they pass, those memories will come back when you need them. They become voices of intuition and of guidance.
We want to be a lifeline for somebody else. We want to inspire others and say, we know what it's like to be where you are, but you're not always going to be there. Just take our hand, believe us. We'll take the journey with you.
When life presents 1,000 reasons to mourn, show life that you have 1,001 reasons to smile.
We get through this one breath at a time. We don't do it a day at a time. That's healing. That's positive, and that's what the world wants to talk about.
People die. Love doesn't die.
We always say, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours.